Hey everyone, this is Roman Prokopchuk, and this is the Digital Savage Experience podcast. Today I have with me Mitch Hankins. He's a cloud certified full stack developer who speaks to professionals who struggle to find meaning in their lives. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Roman. It's great to be here. I really look forward to having a conversation with you.
My pleasure. Tell me a little bit about your journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I got to where I am today through, I would say, a lot of introspection, a lot of curiosity, and a lot of pain. I was born and raised in the Netherlands, lived there for the first 20 years of my life. And at some point, I decided, hey, I really want to live in the United States. And I decided to enlist in the U.S. Air Force. I could do that because my dad's American. And through the Air Force, I became an air traffic controller. And then I picked up computer science classes because the military paid for those as well. And it kind of flowed into computer programming. And so I kind of had this whole idea for my life of, okay, I'm going to go into like a high paying career field where I have a lot of freedom, work from home, not have to deal with a lot of people, and just have sort of this control, which I always felt the lack of when I was younger. So I really had this desire for it. And really, the more I achieved a lot of these goals financially, the more I really realized how wrong I felt, how much emptiness I felt on the inside. And through that, I really started seeking out coaches and therapists, and discovered that I wasn't unhappy because I necessarily set the wrong goals or was achieving them, but because I was focusing on the things that didn't really contribute to happiness. Like I was very lonely. I lacked community. I'd lived in two different countries at the time, many different states, and I'd never really built like a solid community around me. I didn't have meaningful connections and fulfilling relationships and things I got a lot of enjoyment from. And so when I really started that process of, well, how can I address those painful feelings? And I really invested a lot of time and energy and money into development courses, into books, into retreats and all these different things. And slowly things started changing around where I had a meaningful community and I had great people around me. And then I thought to myself, like, well, that's amazing. Like I have a better life now, but I still see people all around me that have the same problem. And so what I decided to do is to kind of pay it forward and to really develop like a brand around the steps that I'd taken to find meaning in life and to kind of share that with other people and to say like, hey, it took me like, two decades, but here's how you do it in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And I would say that's kind of how I got to where I am now, just through really asking myself, like, why am I in so much pain? And what can I do to fix it instead of keep numbing it?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, kind of finding meaning and purpose and being or getting a reward out of like a career or your
Hmm.
life in general, I think is human nature, but especially in, I guess, lonely professions. So,
Yes.
developers oftentimes are remote, they're don't necessarily
Hmm.
have, like you said, a community or even a team behind them at work. And I mean, it's the same thing that they say about kind of like entrepreneurs and startups and, different endeavors that mental health is a big thing. And I think even the rate of suicide and obviously certain careers and endeavors is a lot higher, I think, attributed to because there's no community, there's no tribe, there's no, you feel alone, you feel kind of lonely regardless,
Hmm.
there's a lot of lucrative careers out there and, business making opportunities,
Hmm.
but, you make all this money and have all this capital, but you still haven't
Yeah.
addressed kind of, the elephant in the room. So, I mean, I can relate and understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've really been told like, oh, this is how you're successful. Like, I think we receive a lot of messages from society about like, what success means, like whether it's, direct messages from well-meaning adults or like more hidden subliminal messages through like advertising and such. But, we chase after the fancy car and the nice house and the attractive partner and the high paycheck and all these different things. Um, But really, as cliche it is, once you get there, once you get these things, it's like, oh, okay, like I have this, but now, I still don't feel good. And then you start realizing like, well, it's because if it's not authentically expressed, if it doesn't come from the heart, if it doesn't come from something that you were, called to do or born to do, then it's just going to feel empty. And it's because it's not going to have that value for you. And what you said on the mental health side of things with like these more isolated professions, I feel like that's spot on, and after Corona, so many people went and into the remote culture, and you see it everywhere. And, even the science says things like Zooms, they just don't trigger the same suite of physiological functions in the brain that in-person interactions do. So if you have, remote work, and then because of the pandemic, you can't see friends and everything's closed. Like, how are you going to get those basic needs that, your body needs food, right? So like, you can't just not go and not eat. It's the same with social interactions. You can't just not interact. Like, you need these things. And for me, it took getting to a really, really low point to really see that. But I see it all around me now, where there's so much unfulfillment, and we keep ourselves distracted and busy, and we numb ourselves through all sorts of different ways, like whether it's watching TV or drinking alcohol or doing drugs. We find distractions, but it's such a common problem.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even before the, I guess, world shut down, I've been remote for about like 6 years now. There's obviously benefit because I can work anywhere where there's an internet connection, and be in Hawaii for a few weeks or somewhere else, so on and so forth. But regardless if you're doing that, you still have to put in the time to kind of put yourself out there, put yourself in situations where you can potentially, I wouldn't necessarily like, make friends everywhere you go, but at least go to a social situation where you're having a conversation. A lot of people aren't as outgoing. They are, introverted, and that remote aspect, although for me it is productive because I have that extra time to cut out to drive to an office or commute somewhere, it still is noticeable in terms of like how my behavior changed. So my wife noticed, when I was going to an office or had like a stationary, place, and then had people in the office or go out after work or whatnot and do more networking, like my attitude and mindset kind of changed. So like I became a little bit more reserved and kind of, I guess, I forgot like a human interaction, how to like interact in a way. I wouldn't say I like became feral or anything, like hiding out, but there was a slight change when, you're surrounded by people day in and day out, and then you're kind of like a lone wolf doing your own thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can 100% relate to that. Like, I've always been pretty, I don't want to say extroverted, but it's been pretty easy for me to talk to people and to make friends and all these different things. But then, you add all the daily stresses of life, like you got to pay the bills, you have to work, you have to do all these different things. And all of a sudden it becomes a lot harder. I think the struggle like everybody has certain mental health challenges, but as an adult, they're definitely, I think it's under a lot more pressure because you don't have those cares when you're younger. So I've definitely noticed that as I've aged and as I had taken on more and more responsibility, that it's had more and more of an impact on my life. And so I definitely had more of I would say, impetus, more of a drive to really figure out, what's exactly is going on. And I think that for a lot of people, like regardless of age, the pandemic and remote work culture has just a huge impact on everyone. And I think from the people I've talked to, especially, of course, in the engineering space that I'm in, these are issues that I see everywhere, and it's not very easily talked about. Like, there's a lot of resources that you can seek out once you really start looking for it. But, for me, at least, I always felt very alone in these struggles. Like, I had no idea until I really started looking for these resources. Like, I had no idea, like, oh, there's other people that have these struggles that I do. Like, there's other people that feel anxiety and depression and under these circumstances, or imposter syndrome. Like, I felt very alone in that.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes there's a void either within an industry or within something that you're experiencing. There's not
Hmm.
many, I guess, subject matter experts. I
Hmm.
don't know if I would even want to call it someone that's been through that experience and is vocal about communicating
Hmm.
and expressing it through, a public forum. So either interviews, social media, any kind of like created content. It's similar
Hmm.
thing happened to me. My wife and I became foster parents in 2018. So then
Hmm.
I started experiencing things with the process, dealing with the state, the foster care system being broken,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of women putting stuff out about how they felt, what they've experienced, but not a lot of foster dads. So
Yeah.
I basically started going on platforms, sharing my experiences, and becoming more so of like an advocate for change for the process. So also, if you're in a in a category in the industry, in a part of your career where a lot of people don't necessarily express themselves, or
Yeah.
everybody is
Yeah.
struggling with a certain thing, like become that advocate or that voice. Because if there's nobody out there, why not be you and impact other people around you?
I really love that. Yeah, I think that's kind of why I felt called to do it. I've definitely been asked as like, well, why is this something you want to do? And I'm like, well, because, and you could probably relate to that. Like if somebody had done that for me, I wouldn't have spent all those years struggling, like, and if somebody had already done that, it could have saved me a lot of time. So now by me doing that, I could potentially save a lot of pain for other people. And that somehow makes my pain a little bit more worth it. Because there's definitely been a large part of my life where, due to the experiences I've had in life, trauma related and such, where I was just, so I would say, disconnected from my body and my reality, that it was more kind of like watching life through this glass, or kind of like it's a movie or something where, everything just kind of seems to be happening around you, but you're not really connected to it. And so for me, I never really had a college experience, for example, so I kind of missed out on that. I feel like I missed out on like a childhood, and all these things are things that you can never really get back. They're things that you can never really make up for. And I kind of want, as you've said, like I want to fill up that space and say like, hey, I'm going to put my foot down for this, and enough is enough. And this doesn't have to keep happening. Like this can start getting talked about. And it should be talked about. And I think you can relate to that. Hey, of course, you wouldn't have been able to probably been able to say as much on the subject if there had been someone before you, but it probably would have saved you a lot of frustration, a lot of pain in these things if there had been someone that provided that content for you.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's being authentic to yourself. So expressing
Hmm.
yourself authentically, not over. I guess I would say maybe glamorizing is the word, because a lot of people tend to do an interview, and if they experience something, they'll 10x it to hyper
Right.
sensualize it. So
Right.
really be authentic, and be vulnerable and be open about like what experience that you've been through, what you're trying to convey, or just, I mean, being yourself goes a long way. I mean, going to events and different networking things, when somebody is being truthful, you can hear like the
Mhm.
authenticity
Yeah.
or passion in their voice when they're speaking about a subject. And a lot of the time, you can really pick out, if you've spoken to enough people over time and have some kind of emotional empathy and that emotional IQ, you
Yeah.
can have a read in when somebody's not being genuine. So I mean, there's a lot of people talking about a lot of subjects, but are they looking to first sell you something? Or are they pushing a course? Or are they this, that, or the other? Or are they
Right.
genuinely trying to
Right.
help you get out of a situation or a rut that they've experienced themselves? Because like you said, sometimes you go through things in life regardless of what it is, and you truly don't, I guess, close that door. I mean, if you experience or see something traumatic in your life, you don't necessarily forgive or forget. Sometimes it's kind of like you have an open wound and then it heals, but the wound is still there. You have that
Right.
recollection. Sometimes things bring you back to that experience or that time, but getting out of it and finding what helps you get through it to begin with is kind of like the first step of healing. And I think for men in general, I mean, I'm from Eastern Europe originally, so like sharing your emotions, being, I guess, vulnerable in that sense, is viewed as a weakness. Now, I'm not saying go around and just like be emotional about everything to everybody, but like if you have a few people, like I see it with close friends, like if you have a guy friend, for me, like one of my best friends that I've been friends, let's say, since elementary school, I can share like that and potentially like get emotional about something once in a while. But you don't necessarily have to do that and express that vulnerability to everybody. But if you find somebody like that, and if somebody is like bringing you back or letting you even get to that point where you feel like safe in terms of having that conversation, that I feel like that conversation, needs to be had. And especially in a social media platform or, a podcast is a great platform because, if you reach one person, if you reach 1,000 people, if it's something impactful that you're trying to deliver, if it impacts their life, and, the power of the internet, somebody can be listening, 10, 20 hours away and really have a, life-changing experience through, what's shared.
Yeah, I love that. There's a lot of things you said that really resonated with me. And, on the podcast side of things, I've had people reach out to me saying, I was having a tough time or I'm going through like a tough thing. And then I heard you speak about this and how you deal with it. And, it completely turned my day around. And for some people that might sound really small, but for me, that makes my entire day, and not just my day, but that gives meaning to my existence. Like, and that sounds very, I don't know, cliche maybe, but it really does, because, you're actually like helping someone, you're being of service, which to me really is the foundation for a meaningful life. So for me, it's huge. And indeed, it does tie back to vulnerability, where I don't think you need to be vulnerable with everybody. I think, in fact, even, excuse me, that could be, very damaging. But the ability to be vulnerable is lacking in so many people. And I think if you don't have the ability to be vulnerable with someone, like whether it's a partner, or which can be tough too, because like men aren't supposed to cry, we have all these different beliefs that society taught us. Even being vulnerable with a partner can be tough. But if there's nobody you can be vulnerable with, all that emotional pain that you're going to experience at some point in life, like when you lose a loved one or when you go through health issues, like something is bound to happen. And how does that emotional pain get released? Like, emotion to me is, it stands for energy and motion. It's energy. Like if it doesn't get released through vulnerability, through being able to share it, through being able to process it, then you're going to be doing stupid stuff. You're going to be looking at drugs, or you're going to be looking at other high risk activities. And, I've been there. So I'm speaking from experience. Like, if you don't have a healthy avenue to process these things, then you're going to find unhealthy ways. And vulnerability is a really healthy way to do that. So I don't think you have to be vulnerable with everybody, but it's a life skill that comes in incredibly handy when you need it, and what you said about people trying to sell you things, like that's why I always look for coaches and for people that have made the transformation that I want to make. Like for me, it's not so much about statistics or, whatever things they can show, like spreadsheets. For me, it's really about, how relatable is your situation and how can it help me? Like, how much did you go through the thing that I am going through now? And how much do you understand where I want to go? And that's always, really the criteria that I've used to engage with coaches. And that's, I think, why I've had so much luck and such a dramatic life improvement through using coaches.
Yeah. And oftentimes, it's hard to come to a point or a realization that you have to change, or you're dealing with something, or you're feeling a certain way, or, you're empty, not fulfilled. And sometimes that's step one, but a lot of the time it's one of those things where, you watch something inspirational on YouTube or whatever, you get super hyped, then there's no action. So I feel like having somebody in your corner or somebody that keeps you accountable is key. And then obviously somebody that's been through it. Now, I mean, I've spoken to coaches that coach in areas that they may have not experienced the type of coaching that they do, like that life experience, which I may or may not agree, with that rationale, but it's still someone that keeps you
Right.
actionable, that keeps you on plan. I mean, it's
Yep.
kind of obviously the same if you go to the gym. Eventually you'll get a mindset after a certain amount of time. If you do something repetitively, it becomes basically second nature, and you're able to
Mhm.
not get distracted as easily or get thrown off, whatever path you're on. So,
Yeah.
if you're first time in the gym and you have a coach, a trainer, it's a lot easier if that trainer is obviously knows what he's doing and can relate to you and trains you, in relation to you to stay on something. But as you mentioned also just now, if you experience something that's, painful, a trauma, a loss, abuse, and if you don't harness it, or if it doesn't go somewhere,
Mhm.
you can either
Yeah.
obviously use it as a crutch and then turn to vices and things of that nature. But it will eventually, if you don't cope with it, if you don't deal with it, come to terms with it, it'll start spilling over in other parts of your life. So it'll start
Yes.
affecting your work, your business,
Yes.
your relationships,
Yes.
your friendships, and everything else. So I mean, needing to come to terms and needing some kind of, I guess, a way out, or a path or a roadmap, I think is key. And oftentimes that's easier said than done when you're like doing it on your own, or you're on kind of a lonely journey by yourself, in tech development, or you're a digital nomad, or, you're in
Yeah.
one country one week and then next month you're in another country. You have no home base to offer you that support.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's something I really want to develop because I'm so process oriented and so systemized that I really just sat down and I was like, okay, what are the habits I do? What, like, really design a framework around everything, around goal planning, around like finding purpose, all these different things. I've read hundreds, hundreds of books. I just went through them and I just kind of combined everything. And then I really sat down. I'm like, how can I share this with the world? Like, how can I put this into blogs? How can I put this into frameworks I can teach? And, actually take that kind of from lived experience. And it's like you said, like if you don't address these things, like I learned that from personal experience. My time in the military, there were ups and downs, and there were a lot of downs because I had a lot of unresolved issues. And that mainly showed up in, not really being able to relate to people, not really having fun with people, not really having friendships, and getting into trouble a lot, or doing stupid stuff, or getting hurt or injured, or pushing my body and my mind way farther than they could, and having to deal with the damage years later. Like I still to this day, because of my weightlifting, I pushed my body way too far, and now I have a broken back and other spinal issues that I still have to deal with to this day. And again, as we've said before, like it's going to spill out one way or the other. And I really couldn't find anything where it was like this all in one package of really, of my life situation. Like, sure, there are mental health resources. There are like people that help with nutrition. Like there were all these different kind of loosely connected resources, but nothing really that was directly tailored to the situation I was in. So I really had to do all that research myself. And to be honest with you, like the journey was very lonely. It was very aggravating, and I would say I was very desperate for most of it, where I just didn't really know what I was doing, and I felt as if the end was never in sight, I would say. And what you said rings so true. Just having someone there that kind of keeps you accountable and can show you some sort of support, that's huge. And that's always what I've gotten out of coaches. One of my first coaches is actually the one that got me to think about therapy. And once I started going into therapy, I really started changing the beliefs around myself and making smarter life decisions around getting focused on creating friendships and such, instead of always being very obsessed with work. Like I was I had a lot of workaholicism, where I would just spend, from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to bed, I was either reading, working, I was doing something productive, always saying no to fun. And, that's something I was really able to work through because of therapy, which I was led into by a coach. And so all these things kind of come together where, it's just so important to really surround ourselves with the right people. And I think coaches can be a huge part of that.
Yeah, I agree. And therapy and, speaking to people, psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, there's also a negative stigma that a lot of people don't want to go. I think a lot of people perceive the process as, they're going to tell you what to do, or, what you're doing bad or good. It's funny because it's kind of the opposite. You're kind of, digging into your own, I guess, psyche or brain and picking yourself apart. And they're just kind of like the guides in the process. They're just guiding you along the way, and you're coming to, that actual realization yourself. So, I mean, it's a great exercise if you think you need it or don't. Just go through, go to a counseling session. I know a lot of companies with, what's been going on for the last few years in the world. There's like, like a service through certain insurances that you can get matched with a counselor or a therapist. And then, you just jump on the Zoom call. Granted, it's not the same as, being in person in an office, but it's still like critical thinking, analyzing your situation, why you're doing certain things, and potentially, holding you accountable that way as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's personally the preference I even have towards it, like over Zoom. You can even meet them in person once and then do it over Zoom, just because it's so much more convenient. You don't have to stress over driving there, all these different things. But yeah, I do think there's a huge stigma around social media, around therapists. And I think that comes from this belief that we really get imprinted upon us ever since we're children, of like, you have to, especially men, right? Like, you have to take care of your own problems. If you're just talking about them, you're not really offering a solution, then you're complaining. But like, repressing stuff only works for so long. And if you change your mindset from, oh, a therapist is someone who's there to analyze you and put you in a box and put labels on you and try and fix you. If you change from that perspective to a therapist is someone who really cares about you getting to know yourself, and not necessarily changing your behaviors, but helping you understand the beliefs you have about yourself. And when you have an understanding and awareness of the beliefs you have about yourself, your behaviors start changing on their own accord. Like, that's just kind of a natural byproduct. Like, if you can switch your mindset to seeing them more as like a guide, as you said, then I think a lot of the stigma kind of goes away.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think a lot of what's going on in terms of kind of like loneliness and unfulfillment also is a large part of it, or at least for me. Let me talk about myself and not throw it out in generalities, but comparison. So comparison to people that may have started in your career or similar roles when you did, people that maybe you founded a company maybe a lot further on, and I mean there's the quote's been around forever. I don't recall who says it, but comparison is the thief of joy. So you start kind of like not enjoying your own successes or the process, or kind of like figuring out your own stuff and dealing with what you have going on. You're just looking, outwardly and seeing, well, you briefly just mentioned social media in, just different connotation, but social media is a highlight reel. So you see, maybe people you grew up with, they're having, living this lavish life or doing that, this, that, or the other. But I mean, it's a highlight reel. Nobody's really putting kind of like, a lot of things about mental health, mental illness, if they're actually struggling, or they depressed, or they, dealing with other things. A lot of people obviously attempting suicide and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. I mean, financially, potentially declaring bankruptcy and, losing everything and starting all over. That's not on social media. So it's not an accurate depiction. And I think the more we keep comparing ourselves like within society and not worry about like what we have going on in our own lives and our own plate, the further away you get from a point of, happiness and joy as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I actually stayed off social media for a while. Like, I deleted all of it. I would say it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. I deleted everything. I was off of it for about 3 or 4 years. Like, I didn't even know what TikTok was the first year it came out, or so, the first 2 years. And then when I got back on it, I said, you know what, I'm going to do it differently this time. Like, this time, I'm not going to have that pretend life. I'm not going to do what social media is typically used for, as you said, where it's really just everyone showing the highlights and not showing the bad. I want it to be authentic. So like, just to give an example, like one of the things I've really tried hard towards the past few weeks is to get a certain certification with climbing. It's called elite certification, where you essentially clip as you go, as you climb, you clip yourself in, but it's a much more, I don't want to say dangerous form of climbing, but more technically involved. So I've been working towards that for months, and I took the test twice and I failed both times. And, I shared that on social media. I shared like how upset about I was, like how it affected me, and how I do share the good as well. Like when I got other types of certifications, I share that. But also with this, like, this instinct of me was, don't share your failure. Like, just wait until you get the test, because you're probably going to get it within a few weeks, and then be like, oh, I made it. So I really had that instinct to not share it. But like I said, this time around, I wanted to do it differently on social media. I wanted to show my true life, the good and the bad. And so that's what I did. And I see it all around me, and even in all the research that I've done and all the people that I've talked to, just the effects that social media have on people is amazing. I mean, you spend an average, I think, like 2 hours of social media per person. Like when you count that over a lifetime, that's like an entire year or years of your life that you spent on social media. And the effects that it has on people is so pronounced when it comes to depression and anxiety, because the entire system of social media revolves around dopamine triggers, right? Getting people hooked into it, into like when it comes to brain chemistry. So the whole way these algorithms are designed is for it to keep your attention. And we all know that, but it still works. Just like we know that sugar is bad for us, has a certain effect, but yet every time we consume it, it's going to have a certain effect. And that's for me, that is such a huge part of what social media does, including with all the good brings. It's also just this huge mental trigger for the lack that we feel. And every time you scroll through your feed, you're going to be able to see like, oh, this person has a better life because, they have a better car, or they have a better body, or they have better life experiences, or they have more friends. That's really what most people feel when they scroll through those news feeds. It's like this lack of, oh, somebody else has more. And I don't think that's necessarily that social media is a bad thing because of that. I just really think it's important to talk about and to be aware of that, so that when you do feel those feelings, it's knowing like, oh, I'm not alone. And this is how a lot of people feel when they look at social media. And it's designed to make me feel this way, because that way I keep engaging with it. But it needs to be talked about, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, obviously there's addiction in terms of social media. People spend the whole day where instead of looking at what people have going on, they could be working towards the things that, they want to aspire to, or potentially, earn. Not that obviously everything is about material things, but obviously if you reach a certain level of success, you may treat yourself to something, or be interested in something, or like, you're talking about rock climbing. Now, if you do that outdoors, indoors, if it's outdoors, you may want to climb a specific, rock face that's in like South America. Well, you can't necessarily maybe do that for a week or two based on your current situation. So like it allows privileges. And I mean, it also, money's not bad. I think the love of money and being consumed by this love of money is the evil we're in money. But, the more assets you have, I think the more good and the more kind of awareness you can bring about as well. So that's kind of a positive about it. But social media, technically addiction, because of that dopamine hit, is a real thing. And you mentioned TikTok. TikTok is theoretically right now, I think, the most addicting platform, because with everything else, you have to basically kind of opt in. So even now Facebook, for Facebook Reels, or other aspects on, Facebook Reels, Instagram Reels, different things like that, you have to click to have it play. With TikTok, it's so you get drawn in because you just scroll and another video starts. You just scroll and there's no like, I mean, you have no barrier to stopping, and by the time you feel like you're done and you have to get off it, 2-3 hours have been sucked away. So, that's definitely like, I mean, even social media isn't an evil thing, but if you use it to add value, or build your personal brand, or use it for whatever you want to use it, and don't be a consumer, be an expert on the platform. A lot of people you know,
Yes.
even on my TikTok, I mean, just sit there and complain, or, and I just say, well, I mean, you're just adding engagement to my channel. So good, bad, or the other, if you're adding it, it
Yes.
just continues the
Yeah.
conversation, which is fine with me. And you're just consuming it
Yeah.
while I'm putting content out, you know, regardless of how you feel about it. So, you know, add value, you know, be visible, but don't sit there all day and consume it.
I think that's such a beautiful point. I mean, that's way more eloquent than I put it. Like, contribute to it. Like, if you see something that you don't like, then contribute to it. But indeed, it's a time suck, and that's even the name TikTok, right? It's literally time passing by. TikTok, time passing by. Like, it's a time suck, and that's the way it's designed. But that doesn't mean that there can't be good. Like, you know, globalization, when it comes to, look at all the awful things right now that are happening in Eastern Europe. But at least we know about it because of the internet. Like, it cannot be suppressed because the Western world has this global internet access where these things cannot go unnoticed. We cannot be, of course, there's going to be some propaganda, like even in our world, but you know, that is because of social media. Like, we know what's going on, and we can be appalled to it, and we can react to it. So there is a good side to social media, and also, you know, we can talk about these things, and we can put our word out there, and that can make other people feel less alone. So there's this beautiful side to social media, but that is when people contribute to it. You know, and there's this other side of it, like, as you said, when you're more the consumerist, when you're just on it to waste time. For me, there is really no such thing as wasting or killing time. There's always things that you can do to work towards your goal, but you have to have a purpose and a goal for that, to have that mindset. So I think what I would say, I don't want to say bothers, that's almost like kind of a judgmental approach, but really, you know, what pains me is when people consume these sorts of resources and they don't have a larger thing they're working towards in life. It's kind of like, well, what are you going to think when you're in your deathbed? Like, how are you going to feel about the life you've led? Are you going to be, well, I wish I tried this one thing that I really wanted to try. I wish I hadn't cared so much what other people had thought. But instead, you spent that time being distracted because that felt easier at the moment than actually working towards something that felt meaningful for you. And I feel like that's really the message that I want to share with people is there's so much in this life that can give meaning. And, you know, we're all here to do something special with our life. Like, we all have a special thing to contribute to the world. And there's no point in wasting it, because you're just going to end up regretting that when life's over.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, that I guess that social media time, you're just on there, you know, consuming, isn't necessarily a waste, because I mean, I've said a lot of the time, the basically in conversation, everything in life is a lesson or a blessing, regardless
Mm-hmm.
of what it is. I mean, you can look at it, you know, either side of that coin. So, you know, you take something out of it, and like you said, you know, in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, or whenever, when you're, you know, hopefully 70s, 80s, or, you know, and life is nearing the end, you're going to regret the things you didn't try or didn't do, and all the what ifs. And usually all of the things that are keeping you from that is yourself. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like the me versus me, getting out of your own head first, because I mean, you're, as a human being, you want kind of not necessarily complacency, but safety, like
Mm-hmm.
shelter. So
Yes.
when something is out of the norm, out of a, I guess, a routine, and you want to take a drastic life change, you start second guessing yourself. And
Yeah.
usually those changes are for the positive. And on the other side of that, there's something a lot better than, you know, what your current experiences are.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think there's a lot of things that can really create a more meaningful life if you do look at, you know, if you are on that consumer side, where I consume a lot of content on you know, on Instagram, TikTok, all these different channels, on YouTube. But it's with the idea of, this resonates with me, like, this makes me feel better. Like, you know, you got to ask yourself, when you just watch something, like, did this make me feel better about myself? Does this help me? Or did it just make me feel bad? And does it really not help me get to where I really want to be? And I think again, it really comes back to, like, this awareness and getting curious and being willing to ask yourself, like, tough questions.
Yeah, I agree. So what's one piece of advice you can leave for the audience, personal or professional?
So my main piece of advice is try to, again, it comes back to curiosity. Get curious about yourself. Stop wearing this mask, whatever mask you're wearing around other people, around friends, around family. Just be true to yourself and get curious about yourself. Find out what you care about, what kind of people you want to have in life, what sort of activities you love doing them, and start doing them. And as you do that, the more you do that, you'll start noticing that you start building a community around those things, and you start having the right people around you that support you in an authentic way in the things that you enjoy doing. And all of a sudden, you're going to start waking up with a lot more energy, a lot more happiness, and a lot more thirst for life.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I guess stepping out of your, safety zone or safety net, whatever you want to call it. And when I first started working kind of remotely, I try to sign up to as many networking things, even though it's like, I don't want to like this whole social setting. I don't know anybody there. Just kind of like get out of it. And at that point, not necessarily having to talk to or engage with every single person there, but at least develop like one or two interactions that can maybe, follow up with, help each other, collaborate in some way, or even, if it's kind of that scary, then finding something or a group that has like common interests. Now that could be an activity, that could be, a movie or a fan club, any common interest, because that makes that conversation or that situation or kind of that air in the environment when you enter that, building or location a lot easier because everybody has that common interest in mind.
Yes, that is so true. That's really, I think, what changed a lot in my life too, by finding these things, like those meetups, like, climbing is a big one for me. Climbing is very community oriented. If you like books, find a book club. If you like archery, find an archery club. It's what you said is incredibly true. When you have this shared activity, everything just kind of feels more like this well-oiled machine, I think.
I agree. So I really appreciate you stopping by today. Can you let the audience know how they can find you or anything else you have going on?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, a lot of the things we've talked about today were mental health related. So one thing I did really want to do is create like this little mini ebook that talk about my habits, how I manage my anxiety, depression, how I really use them. I didn't want to say manage, like how I really use them as fuel and how I make more meaning out of life with them. So people can download that by going to my website at thedebuglife.com and subscribing to my newsletter. And they'll receive that ebook and also get any blog updates. And the blog posts I write are pretty much everything we just talked about. Also, they can follow me on TikTok and Instagram. I have the Debug Life handle there. And I just kind of post about everything we talked about as well, like climbing, my morning routine, the failures and the successes I have in life, and the things I do with friends. And if anybody needs someone to talk to or has some questions, I love having these sorts of conversations. So I encourage anyone to reach out.
Awesome. Thanks again for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.